And welcome to MidDay Café. I want to welcome everybody. It is 12 o'clock on the nose. So for those of you who are joining us, we want to say welcome and, certainly invite your colleagues, let them know. And we have a great show today for you, and I'm very excited. So first off, just some of the shout outs. If you are attending for the first time, if you don't know, on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a Q&A panel. You can post your questions there. We love to hear from you, but also give us shout outs. Let us know who you are, where you're coming from. We love to recognize you and find out, who's tuning in, what's the farthest people are coming from. So we see all that, and we love to, again, just to be able to dialogue with you and to have conversations. So please post questions, shout outs, and we'll call those out. For today's show, we have the following. First of all, we're going to have Mr. Pete Anello is going to be bringing us the news and events happening around Microsoft and MidDay Cafe. We have not only a great show today, but some fantastic ones coming up over the next 2 weeks. And then we're going to take a brief hiatus as we reschedule our next cycle of broadcasts. After that, we are then, and I see Memphis, Tennessee. Hello, Memphis. Welcome. After that, we're going to be having our featured speaker today. Karuana Gatimu is going to be talking us about Microsoft Teams adoption and governance, a topic that is very hot on everyone's mind these days, and bringing us some great resources to help you out. And I know you're going to have a lot of questions for her. We'll have open Q&A. So we'll tee up most of those questions for at the end of her presentation, and then we'll have a whole open Q&A session. And then finally, we'll wrap up and we'll be out of here by 1 o'clock, no later. So without further ado, I'm going to pull up my buddy, Mr. Pete Anello, who is going to, let me go ahead and get a little split screen going here. And there we go. Pete, go ahead and take it away.
Oh, you want me to share my desktop?
No, I got I've got it up here. There you go.
All right, cool. Yeah, thanks, Mike. Sorry about that. Just a little mental cloudiness on my part. So, news and events for the week, starting off with the Teams announcements for Ignite. It is a couple weeks old at this point, but there's so much information that it's still newsworthy. And if you haven't had a chance to review all of the updates that we announced at Ignite regarding Teams, the hyperlink is provided the blog post that outlines all the announcements in one spot for you guys. Some of my favorites that I know my customers are really clamoring for, we talked about the 1,000-person meeting interactive webinar with attendee reports afterwards, so you can see who joined when, how many people joined, etc. For me, one of my favorite announcements that we had was around Operator Connect, which is what we're doing to allow our partners like BT, Orange, Verizon, etc., to bring PSTN services quickly and easily to your tenant. So it's just another way that we are working really hard to bring enterprise class PSTN services to our customers in a way that gives them a lot of flexibility to have a very large Teams adoption. We also announced we are extending our Teams calling plan market. We've added 8 countries. New Zealand, Singapore, Romania, Czech Republic, Hungary, Finland, Norway, and Slovakia, which brings us to 26. And we do anticipate that will grow as well. And there are some new Teams peripherals as well. There's Teams panels for outside of your meeting room, so you can have things like, occupancy warnings, availability, etc., right on the outside. And we have new and intelligent room speaker for Teams meetings. There are so many announcements around Power Platform, chat and collab security that really, I encourage you all to go to the Teams blog and review all of the Teams Ignite announcements. Also, we have, if you're interested in virtual desktop, you're curious how other organizations are using Windows Virtual Desktop during the pandemic, there's a great session that outlines what our customers are doing, goes deep into the roadmap for Windows Virtual Desktop, as well as gives lots of additional resources for you and your organization to have successful experiences with Windows Virtual Desktop. What was the other one? Sorry, my eyesight's killing me. Oh yeah, Azure Active Directory external identification is GA, and there are some new preview features that were released along with GA as well. There is a great webinar that outlines how Microsoft's showcases Microsoft's unified DLP story. So whether you're moving from on-prem to online, if you're interested in DLP with MCAS or Microsoft Teams, this would be a really great session for you guys to attend. There are 2 sessions to be able to, be respectful of people's geographic locations. But by all means, join it. Send it to your customers, send it to your peers. It's there for everyone. And then next week we have Teams shared channels as the topic of the day. And the following week we have the Teams adoption app for Microsoft, the adoption hub app for Microsoft Teams. Thanks, Mike.
Mike, you're on mute. Mike, you're on mute.
Come on, unmute.
There you go.
There I am. I'm talking and I'm muted. Normally I just leave it off. So here we are. We're ready for our feature presentation. I'm very excited about today. We have Karuana Gatimu. And Karuana, if you want to share your desktop, you can kick me off and take it away.
Okay, I will. Thank you so much. Let me get this sharing going on here so that everyone can see. Hello, everyone. My name is Karuana Gatimu, and I work in Microsoft Teams Engineering. I run our customer advocacy group. And I'm thrilled to be with you here today to talk a little bit about teamwork governance. Governance is an important part of creating a fantastic collaboration and communication experience, but it's probably the least understood portion of Microsoft 365. And so we've put together some resources for you that'll hopefully help you to navigate what great governance actually looks like. So I'm really thrilled to be with you here today. If you're interested in this topic, you should follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. We also publish a monthly newsletter on adoption news, and we talk about governance, adoption, security, all that kind of good stuff that creates this great employee experience. So I'm happy to be with you here today. And if we want to hop over and show the slides, then that will be fantastic, and I will get going. I'll put my glasses back on so I can actually see now that I am done with the introduction. As you think about governance in your organization, I really want you to take in this idea that good governance precedes great adoption. Great adoption is defined by employees having successful and secure access to the tools they need when they need them. And it should be a frictionless self-service environment, but you need robust IT manageability. Like, this is just a really important component of everything that we're doing today. And it's very important that we understand that this is achievable, right? Satisfied users and a frictionless self-service experience is absolutely achievable, whether you are doing using native tools in Microsoft 365, or you choose to go that extra step and do provisioning through something like ServiceNow or what have you. But I always encourage organizations to rethink the way that they grant access to experiences, applications, and services in their IT infrastructure. In larger organizations, over time, this has become pretty complex. And if you didn't already have to simplify because of people very quickly working from home during the global pandemic, I highly suggest that you think about it now, because this hybrid work that we're talking about, that we talked about at Ignite and we're continuing to see around the world, is likely going to continue. And so we need to make sure people are having great collaboration experiences, but that they're secure from wherever they may be. Now, if you've ever been to one of my presentations, you will know that I always start with the resources, especially for those of you who like to follow along at home. This page, aka.ms Teamwork Governance, is the page that has the resources that I'll be talking about today. You should know that we're in the middle of upgrading that page because we have a site that some of you may have not heard about, which is adoption.microsoft.com. And so adoption.microsoft.com provides all of the adoption and governance and solution guidance that you'll need to get more out of Microsoft 365. And if you visit up in the navigation topics additional, you'll find the link to the teamwork governance topic in its current location. And as I said, we're upgrading that page to be better integrated with this whole site experience, which we just upgraded at Ignite. And I'll walk through a little bit more of that in a little bit. Lastly, we want to make sure that you have the main Microsoft Teams resource cheat sheet. This is the information that you're going to need in addition to adoption.microsoft.com to really stay on top of everything that's happening in Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Teams. We've got our roadmap, our technical community, our documentation and guidance, and our show on YouTube, Coffee in the Cloud, that my team and I produce. And between those four areas, you'll be able to really stay on top of what's going on. Adoption.microsoft.com is really targeted not only towards IT professionals, but really the business users in your organization and the champions in your organization. But if you're an IT professional out there, I hope that you're familiar with the technical community and our core documentation at Success with Teams. Both of those are important resources. And the community is always there to help you and answer your governance questions, your feature questions. It's a fantastic place to be, especially with all of the new features which we just announced that are still rolling out around the world. If you happen to be out there and you run or know of the Champions program in your organization, I highly suggest that they join my Microsoft 365 Champions program. We have a monthly free training call where we talk about new features, driving adoption across the entire Microsoft 365 suite. And you can take all those resources and use them in your own organization to help train your users. So we like to make sure that you have access to all that stuff right away. Now, when we start talking about governance, it's important to think about what phase of deployment you may be in. Now, it used to be that we had a more structured methodology for doing service deployments, but of course the pandemic turned a lot of that on its ear, right? We just had to respond. And many of you who were planning a deployment of Teams or other Microsoft 365 workloads like modernizing your SharePoint infrastructure or, rolling out OneDrive, you had to do it very rapidly. We saw these rapid deployments all around the world. And now, depending upon the phase of return to work that you may be in, people are going back and kind of tightening up or polishing those rapid deployments that they did. And governance is one of the things that they're polishing up. So even if you don't get a chance to go back and completely redo your deployment, and you shouldn't have to do that, you want to be mindful of what you skipped. What did you skip as you turned on the lights and got everyone working from home in a successful way? So these phases were from kind of the pre-pandemic world, but they're applicable now because many of us, as I said, we didn't do some of the design work because we had to simply get people effective from wherever they were. So now you have an opportunity to really think about the roles in your organization and what they need. The office of the CEO needs different things than your frontline worker. And so you need to think about the service and pivot on the roles themselves, not the features and capabilities. I know that we always talk about features and capabilities at Microsoft, and I love all the new bling that's in our product space. However, if you really want to drive value and have the right kind of governance, it's about the roles their locations, what they need, the services they need, and that will really help you make the right governance decisions as you go through the process. If you don't have a group of early adopters or champions, I highly encourage you to create one. Even if it's just yourself and 5 other people, make sure that they're business users in that group of champions, and they will be able to test for you the types of governance processes that you are likely going to want to have as you go through the product itself. Especially with the advent of templates in Teams and the work that we're doing to unify templates across SharePoint and Teams and other workloads in the Microsoft Cloud, the governance aspect is important in terms of who can do what and who can get to what. So the phases are very important. So you're thinking about your design, that comes from that step 1, that startup phase. You're thinking about the types of experiences you want to provision based on the roles. And then you have a group of people in step 2 that allow you to test the policies and processes that are going to be available globally in your organization. The feedback that you get from those early adopters is absolutely essential to being able to have a successful implementation. And let's be clear, the consequences of poor governance is that people simply go around you. You actually don't secure your data. People create shadow IT. They start texting around spreadsheets, right? Like the bane of every IT administrator's existence is this data leakage. So if you don't want data leakage, you must have frictionless governance and a way of leveraging the capabilities. And by the time you get to step 3, you're there working with your stakeholders and you have a strategy for your services. You understand what is a successful experience based on each of those roles, and then you're able to actually get into the driving adoption phase. Now, there are different types of governance in an IT organization, and people have a tendency to talk about them all together. That's not usually super successful because every type of governance needs its own thought process. Whether you're governing solutions, you're understanding your search and permissions, what is the security, the fundamental security of your Microsoft 365 tenant? Hopefully everybody here is using 2-factor authentication. If you are not, turn it on immediately. Use the Authenticator app. It's super simple, but that core security is really at the center of everything. Container and content governance is what we're talking about today. And then the change management process. When do you let people know that things are going to change? And that is what we're going to focus on today, is container and content governance. That's really what Microsoft 365 is about when you think about SharePoint and Teams and OneDrive and all the other components. So I'm not specifically addressing, for instance, solution governance. There are some pillars, and I wanted to mention one other thing. I'm going to go through a few of these slides, and I'm going to get to the main decision tree that we have and the main 7-step process we have for driving this. And then I definitely want to make sure that you have an opportunity to get your questions answered. So as I go along, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A window. The team will curate those. I'll make sure to leave some time to answer those questions for you so that we can, talk about the things that you need to see. So if you don't have a strategy around what's important about your governance, I suggest that you find that sooner rather than later. This slide is an example of how we look at it inside Microsoft. I used to work in Microsoft IT. I ran our SharePoint implementation and Skype for Business with a group of amazing people. And we had these ideas and principles that we adhered to as we created policies and procedures in our own environment. And, I never want to lose my IT professional card. And the reality is that Slideware is lovely, but policies in the admin center are better. The reason that you have these is so that you can explain to the business stakeholders in your organization what you're doing and why it has value and why you need people to understand it. Every person in your organization is accountable for the security of your data and adhering to these governance policies. And so you want to make it a team effort. And those are the most successful Microsoft 365 implementations that I see today around the world. In my new role is that it's when IT professionals have partnered with the business leaders to craft these principles and the policies that implement them. So the other thing I'll say about this, which I'm sure you've already read, is that it's about kind of a zero trust model. Now, if you attended Ignite, you'll hear us talk quite a bit about that now. So it's really kind of an evolution with some additional capabilities of the least permissions process. It basically means that you're always going to be validating people's access to the network itself, to the data that's inside it. So I don't trust you automatically as an employee. I'm going to validate you at every step. And that represents a shift for many organizations, but it is quite necessary today, given some of the threats that we see online and the intentionality of these folks who are bad actors in the world. And so we want to make sure that from the very moment someone is trying to use a device to access your corporate applications and data, that you know who they are, that you're providing challenge, that you're ensuring healthy devices, and all of this good stuff. So, you know, the governance that I talk about from a data and container standpoint is really in the context of that zero trust environment where that authentication model is in play. So to be super clear, to govern Microsoft Teams, you have to govern Office 365 groups, or now Microsoft 365 groups. It is absolutely essential that you do it in that way. There is no way to govern Teams outside of the groups. And what that means is you're also governing the SharePoint experience that is attached to Teams. And anything else that it lives, like Planner, that lives inside that Office 365 group. So really important that you think about that as you're going through this process and designing what your governance model should look like. So I am a fan. Now let me back up and say that I'm the author of the Adoption Specialist courseware for Office 365 or Microsoft 365. And I'll tell you that this model has evolved over time, and there's more than one. Some of our partners out in this space have other ways of looking at this, but this is ours from a Microsoft perspective, that it's basically 3 tiers. And you may adjust this based on the size of your organization. You may include region in this or an additional level, but at the very basic level, having these 3 tiers is important. And why? Because it controls the experience that an employee would have. I'm going to actually start from the top, because at the company level, you think of your company intranet, your HR portal, your new employee onboarding experience. You know, there are experiences that every employee in the company should have access to. We hope that you're using SharePoint for that company intranet, but you may be using something else. Whatever it is you're using to provide that fundamental experience for every employee in the company, that is something that has, you know, the most open permissions model. Usually there is a tightly governed group of people who can publish to those experiences, but everyone can read it. Right? So one-to-many publishing, and there are broad conversations. So you may be using an organizational team in organizational group in Teams. You may be using Yammer, but you're driving broad conversation across the organization of people who may not know each other. Now, of course, again, that's super relevant in larger companies, larger organizations. And if you're in a smaller organization, why it becomes much simpler. Because you can use that org-wide team in Teams to facilitate that conversation. But in any respect, you should have that company portal that allows you for information sharing and discovery. Then you start to click down into the departments and divisions. And again, we always recommend that each department or division have a company-facing experience. You want the HR and the marketing department, even the sales department, the service or product areas, to have information that's available to other employees who are outside of that area. And again, that's what SharePoint is for. And that's a communication site that is not connected to an Office 365 group, and you can use that for publishing. I'll tell you, we're kind of in the middle of an evolution there also, because with the announcements about Microsoft Viva, which is our new employee experience platform, leveraging SharePoint for this and the news function and highlighted pages and what have you, we'll be putting out some additional guidance on that. in terms of the best practices to integrating information across your organization. But fundamentally, from an IT pro perspective, it kind of doesn't change anything, right? You still need to have this fundamental infrastructure in place, if you will, for the sharing of information. So this is few to many publishing, meaning that there's a few people in each group who are able to publish to those main portals. There's specific conversations and resources. And I always delineate between what a department wants to share with everyone else in the company versus the working areas that they have as individuals. And so the working areas that they have as individuals is really important because that's where you're going to see your team's implementation, right? Because that's where people are preparing documents, working on policies, doing their day-to-day work. And that's where you start to bleed into the work group. And that's why you can see you have a little bit of color here, and you may not be able to see it, but at the top, we've got that teal, which of course often represents SharePoint. Here in department and division, you have a blending between OneDrive, where individuals may have content, those department or division portals, which are the teal. And then over here starts to bleed into the purple because those work groups start to come into play. And that's where Teams lives, essentially. Teams is the we. If OneDrive is me, where I save things that only I really need access to with occasional sharing, Teams is the we, where I share things with the people that I work with. And of course, from a teamwork governance perspective, it's always better to have more teams and to have bigger teams and more channels versus having a lot of teams. And I do have a video that's specific on that topic out on Coffee in the Cloud, which you can find. And it goes through some designs around what your teams should look like. At least it's a recommendation. It's a starting point. So, and if your organization isn't structured like this, it's okay, right? You can keep this as simple as what does everybody need to see, like your company intranet, and where's all the work happening? That's fine. It's just that most organizations are a little bit more complicated than that. But simplicity is, queen in this whenever you're designing an employee experience. And then, of course, as I said, you'll have the Viva elements that will come along and also provide some additional structure around the employee experience. All right. So here we go. Now let's get into some of the meat of this, right? The governance quick start that we have specifically for Teams. I've got a link here on the screen. aka.ms Teams WAC Governance Quick Start. You can also get to it from that main link, that main governance link that I was sharing. It's very important to kind of go through and document your answers to these questions as you're creating your governance policy. And I do recommend that all of you write this stuff down, put it in a PowerPoint or in a Word document, but have a starting point that you can share with those business leaders. Like, who can create a group? Can everyone do that? I'm a fan of allowing people to create whatever they want, but then governing the life cycle of the group. And that's how you contain sprawl and clutter. I know that most IT departments are concerned about that, but I think historically we've really tried to lock down the user experience, and that has, in my opinion, backfired pretty intensely around the world when you look at the implementations that exist and the satisfaction of the users. And I don't think end users are going to tolerate that anymore in this hybrid work world. I think that they need what they need when they need it. And so our job as IT professionals is to govern it on the other side. But in your organization, what you may say is only full-time employees can create groups. We do this at Microsoft. A supplier who has access to our network cannot actually create or be an owner of an M365 group. They can be promoted to owners once the group is created by a full-time employee, but they cannot actually provision the group. And so you may think of policies like that. Maybe you have first-line workers on a manufacturing floor. You want them to participate in groups, but they have no need to actually create them. Now, I will say that people are social creatures. And if they can't create a group for their little pod of people, then they'll go do it on some other application. And that's where the data leakage starts. So, definitely try to be more open about who can create, but do things like require naming conventions, limit guest access, and start to use sensitivity labels. So sensitivity labels are a capability in the admin center, and you can align your policies to the sensitivity label itself. And since this is kind of a shorter workshop today, I won't go through that, but we have some videos on that and some articles on that specifically that I highly recommend, because a sensitivity label will allow you to say, this is just a general group, nothing particularly highly confidential in here. And so it's going to have a life cycle before it expires of a year. We're going to allow guest access. People can put apps in there. They can, run meetings. They can do whatever they want to do in this very general group. As groups become more labeled more confidentially, you can limit things like that. In highly confidential groups at Microsoft, you cannot add a guest, right? That is by design. We don't want that most highly confidential information to be shared outside the boundaries of our full-time employees. And so it's things like that that actually allow you to control the data, control the leakage, and control who can see what. So these are the beginnings of the decisions that you need to make, and I encourage you to practice with some of these. Every policy for governance in Microsoft 365 can be applied by a group. So say, for instance, you have a group in Azure Active Directory of all your first line workers. You can control whether or not they can add guests to their groups. These are the things that you should be testing with those early adopters, the types of policies, and you can control it and then roll it out, broadly. Meeting capabilities is specific to Microsoft Teams because obviously we do meetings, as I know all of you know, and we do webinars and live events like the one you're experiencing today, and you want to decide who can do that sort of thing in your organization. And so there are meeting policies that allow you to control who can, for instance, provision a live event. You may want to have somebody just sign up and watch a little training before they go do a live event. And I encourage that. You may not want people to be able to create, most people to be able to create public events or go to an external encoder, things of that nature. So again, you can use forms and create some IT governance around that in, I beg of you, the least frictionless way possible so that people can communicate effectively. And so I do want to pause and ask Mike, do we have any questions that I should be answering now that I'm starting to delve into some of this?
Sure. Yeah, we do have a few here. One was asking, the first one was, will we gain access to this recording? And I already published out, for those who are unaware, we will post the recording of this out to aka.ms/HLS blog, and we'll have also links to the podcast versions. But the first question we had was around how do we get started with governance if we've already rolled out Teams?
That's a great question. So you can, I'm going to take you back to this here, right? Start to model your policies on paper, because you can implement policies like this at any time. You've turned on the service, but if you haven't implemented the governance model, that's something that you can begin to, first off, look at your Azure Active Directory groups by the persona. If you're a company that has, like I've been talking about, information workers or management in an office versus people in the field or things of that nature, you want to make sure your Azure Active Directory groups are structured in that way and your employees are put in there. And then you can start to implement things like the sensitivity labels I'm referring to, the meeting policies I'm referring to. But the groups are really, the Azure Active Directory groups are really the foundation of being able to implement your governance policy. And then you can also create an early adopter group and get people to opt into that. And then you can start to test these policies. So think about your organization, map out your roles, and then make sure you have Azure Active Directory groups that you can use to apply policies against, and then start making some of these decisions, writing them down and testing them. So you can absolutely get started that way. And one thing I'll mention is sensitivity labels can be retroactively applied to existing groups, just like policies for maintaining that there should always be 2 owners. which I highly recommend that be a rule in your organization, that there are always 2 owners of any Microsoft 365 group. That's also something that you can retroactively implement, and the client, the desktop client or the web will say, hey, your group appears not to have another owner. So like, we'll prompt people in nice ways to do the right thing. Great question.
Yeah, and the next one is one that I hear a lot from folks, and it says, we really struggle with groups and when AD. Do the resources help us to get a handle around what and when?
Yes, absolutely. So it goes back again to the role and to the experience you're trying to drive. So for instance, and I'm going to go back to my handy triangle sheet again. Down here at the bottom level, work groups, if you're already working in Teams, then that is essentially Teams. Teams creates the Microsoft 365 group, which creates also the SharePoint site and the calendar and the mailbox, which you may want to hide from your address book or not, depending upon what you want to do. But if you aren't using Teams, and there are people who aren't using Teams or don't use it for everything, then you're still using those Microsoft 365 groups, because they are going to govern your team sites in SharePoint, right? So that group is, think of the group as the fundamental access container in Microsoft 365. It's really how you control permissions to content in Microsoft 365. And then you don't have to really think about the group. I mean, in a governance model, of course you do, but from an end user perspective, what do they want to do? Do they want to collaborate on documents and talk to each other? Well, then it's Teams, right? I have very few scenarios in which you don't need Teams, and it's designed that way on purpose. You'll hear us talking about it's the organizing layer for all the other services in our cloud, right? Whether it's Dynamics 365 coming in, it's SharePoint coming in, it's third-party applications, like Teams is designed to organize that. And then you are really using SharePoint for those company-wide experiences, right? And there's some blending between the two that I do another session on, but I'll just to keep it simple. It's easy to struggle in this area. I would say that there wouldn't be a need for a worldwide adoption and governance expert like me if we made this like super simple. But basically, you're always using a group, provision stuff from Teams, and get people collaborating on documents in a secure way and having conversations with each other and tracking their tasks, having their meetings. And then when you want to do more, you can start to customize the SharePoint site that's attached to that team. You can bring in third-party apps. You can bring in Power BI. But there's a maturity journey here that I do talk about quite a bit. And hopefully that answered your question.
Excellent. We had 2 more if you want to take them, or do you want to hold those?
No, let's go for it.
Okay. So the next one was, and it's kind of funny because I guess when you were talking about Viva, with the company portal now coming into Teams with Viva, does management switch?
No, it doesn't really. It actually, if your core SharePoint Online implementation is not well organized, has not been modernized, Viva will show that, right? Viva is going to show your primary SharePoint experience, and it's going to allow people to have access to all the news feeds and, content that they have access to in one place. If you haven't cleaned house, then you're going to be inviting people into a little bit of a mess. But it does not change the fundamental need to have this tiered model or to allow people access to the right stuff at the right time. So one of the things that I have folks do in their modernization projects for their SharePoint implementation is now is a great time to use lookbook.microsoft.com to think about new ways of viewing your intranet. And I'm actually going to switch over to adoption.microsoft.com for a second, and I'm actually going to go over there because I use this all the time. It's really, really easy to be able to provision yourself a new intranet, a modern one, and to begin to, integrate in your existing components, but in a new way. And I think it's important to think about this now, especially with Viva. So company, organization, and news, for instance, is one of the templates that we have that automatically is beautiful and pulls in the news feeds from the other portals in your organization. Maybe you don't have other portals, right? Maybe you never thought about having that HR or marketing or sales portal. Well, now's the time, right? You can do that. And I tell you, the most important thing in keeping morale up, especially when people are in this hybrid work situation, is sharing information, allowing them to see themselves and know what's happening around them when they may not have physical contact with their peers. I haven't seen my peers in a year except online. And I stay up to date by reading their news and what they publish, like what's happening out there in the world. And how do I connect to resources if I'm having a struggle? How do I make sure that I can, keep my morale and my well-being up? It's super important that we invest in these employee experiences, and Viva will help you do that. But you do have to have your SharePoint site kind of put together for that, for Viva Connections, and it helps for the other Viva Learning, Viva Topics, Viva Insights. All of those things really are based on some of the, the experiences you've already built.
There's another one here, but the next question was, does Microsoft offer hands-on workshops for setting up governance?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And depending upon your region, I don't know where you're coming from, but you can go to the Microsoft training days. But I know, Michael, you have local resources on that, so I'll leave that for him to give you the links. And I've actually been working on an on-demand webinar series on this as well. And so thinking that that's going to publish in April with some of the new capabilities and the update to include Viva. And the teamwork governance page that I've talked about in the presentation, which I'm showing here, I'm also going to be upgrading this to match the rest of our adoption content, and to make this a little bit more like a wizard, more so you can click through the phases. This is a nice kind of link farm, if you will. It's a good page, we've got it, but I would like this to be a little easier to follow. And so we'll be updating that in early April as well. So come back and check on it the first week of April, and we should have some more content there that's for you. And it's really a derivation of what we have on adoption.microsoft.com. So our main site, I'm just going to go through this right now, Mike, real quick, since we're already here.
Yeah.
Adoption.microsoft.com went through a big upgrade for Ignite, and we have included new governance and new guidance, I should say, on all of the various features that we have across Microsoft 365. But we've organized it now by the kind of role you are, instead of just the product, because so many of these experiences require that you bring the products together. They're what we call better together scenarios, like teams. And so we have business user pages, pages for the champions, and pages for IT professionals. And the IT professional page is where you will find the link to our governance guidance. And this is going to get an upgrade with some of the video training that we have around this and links to the training. And you can get to our virtual training days from here. So this is all live right now on adoption.microsoft.com. But the updates that you'll see next month will hopefully make it easier for you all to follow. We've had a lot of feedback on that, so now we're acting on the feedback to make that a little bit simpler. But the main governance link that you go to from this site is right here. Kind of starts out with this kind of conversation about planning for governance and takes you through the links. It's when you get to the links that I find that it's a little bit of kind of a choose your own adventure or choose your own nightmare, depending on how you feel about it. And that's what I'm going to fix in the next month or so.
Awesome. And we had a question about a link to the templates, which I posted. So lookbook.microsoft.com. And then, but there was also a question, are the templates supported?
Oh, yes, they're supported. They're part of our product suite. Just like you'll find Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways out there as well, which is the precursor to Viva Learning. And you'll find all sorts of templates. Those are actually built by the SharePoint engineering team. So yes, all of the templates are supported. We make sure they work. We make sure they provision. Now, one thing I'll say about those site templates is that in some cases, you do need to be an administrator to provision them. But once they're provisioned by your IT department, if that doesn't happen to be you, then you can have someone else actually managing the site itself. It's just the provisioning itself that needs to be done by an admin in the tenant for some of them. So that's important to know.
Yeah, and then we just had a comment about great resources. And just to highlight what you were talking about, the one really nice thing, because I've helped a number of customers implementing those templates, when you do instantiate it, that administrator has to do it, but they identify who they're going to hand that off to, and nobody else has access until such time as you've gone in, edited, done the work that you want to do, then you open it up.
Absolutely. And the other thing I'll say is this is a fantastic opportunity when you do something like redo your intranet. It doesn't have to be, in many organizations, it's a very, very big project, but it doesn't always have to be. And you can do this just for your division as well if the organization as a whole isn't ready to go. But it's a great opportunity to identify people who want to contribute to the news and to quickly share with them how to edit a SharePoint page. We have some better tools built into the system now about how to do that. We've got some online training for that, and it's really, really simple. And I always tell folks, especially if you're working in teams, Teams is great for conversation when we're working together on something. But to memorialize an outcome, like a quick report on something, that's what a SharePoint page has always been for. And then it's searchable, it can be found. It's a great repository of information that's easily visible and visual versus a chat in Teams. I think people overuse chats in Teams sometimes when they should be publishing news with SharePoint and just integrating that in with a link into their team. So it's a great opportunity to find those people, get them trained up in a 30-minute like lunch and learn, and then they can publish their news and it will magically show up in Viva Connections and here. And it really starts to get the power of the better together, muscle of Microsoft 365 working. All right, let's go back to our core topic, Michael, because I want to cover a couple more things in the time that we have. So look, this slide says controlling governance before day one. Well, we know we're past that now. But in a perfect world, if you were out there watching this for the very first time and you had not deployed Microsoft Teams or some of these modern elements yet in response to the pandemic, then this is where you do. But now what you want to be thinking about is just controlling governance at all, right? And again, you can retroactively apply these policies to pre-existing experiences and grow as you go. Very important concept. You can grow as you go. You can add in other applications. For those of you working in Teams, I very much hope you have every Microsoft application turned on, even if you choose not to use the other ones. And again, that's a policy that happens in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. But these are the questions that you're answering and the policies that you're creating. Who can create naming conventions? I want to say something important about naming conventions. Naming conventions are awesome because you can have data in the name of each Microsoft 365 group that helps to organize the types of teams that are created. Please use the suffix. Please stop using prefix. Prefix was great when it was a SharePoint site, but now that we're in Teams, if you fill out the prefix of every team with RET for retail or FIN for finance, it really is problematic in the user experience because you basically made every single team look like they're the same. And so the suffix is your friend, and let people name the prefix or the core name of the team what they want. And there is a bad word list, by the way, for Microsoft 365, so you can ensure there isn't anything inappropriate in your implementation. But you definitely think about suffix more than prefix, please, for folks. And the magic of this is setting policies, retention, e-discovery, and DLP. Retention allows you, and expiry, those two things together allow you to say, if a group has not been accessed in 6 months, I wanted to start flagging those owners that they should renew it, or it should start to go through the soft deletion, deletion and archival process. You don't have to govern sprawl at the front end anymore. That's not our job in IT anymore, to be in the way of people getting to these services. What we want to do is use expiration and retention policies to dispose of things that aren't being accessed. And that's really important, because if I make a test group today in Microsoft, I can go make a test group, but I know that as soon as I'm done with that and I stop accessing it and I just don't respond to them asking me if I still need it, it'll just go away. And that's a beautiful thing. This is all based on what we learned about from SharePoint sprawl, right? And so if you don't do anything else, sensitivity labels, expiration dates, and retention policies are really important. They're really the fundamentals of governance for Microsoft 365. Then you can get into templates and monitoring and reporting and all that other stuff. But really the basics are absolutely about that idea of lifecycle management that I'm referring to. All of this can be enabled from a self-service perspective. So again, this is an example from inside our own Microsoft implementation. We have this classification, the sensitivity labels that I was referring to, and you see it when you are creating a team site or a team in Microsoft Teams. We have default levels, that you have to change if you want something different. Very important. And this is a shot of the in-product lifecycle management. And so you're in Azure Active Directory as an administrator. You're able to go through and configure these expiration policies. And again, you have a lot of capabilities here to assign policies based on metadata or groups or type of Microsoft 364 team. And then those custom policies will come through and send customizable emails to your users, and it'll say, "Hey, you own a group that needs attention." And like this color, the stuff that you're seeing here, that's how we do it in Microsoft. You could change that template if you wanted to, but it'll warn your users about things like orphan groups and minimum ownership that I was referring to, and all these sorts of things. So it's really important that you go through this. And I was going to suggest also what I tell all the folks that I teach in the world. If you're an IT professional or a business user studying to be an IT professional, I highly recommend that you provision yourself a development tenant if your organization doesn't already have one accessible to you. Because a dev tenant, frankly, is how even I myself stay up to date and teach myself in an environment where I know won't break anything that anybody else is seeing. And it costs me $12 a month, right? So for $12 a month, I have an E5 license and a tenant that I can go and play with and go into the admin center and see how these policies work. And I think actually you can probably do it for like $7 or something. But my point is, if you don't have a development environment where you can play with these things and kind of click along as you go through our Microsoft Learn content, for instance, or one of the workshops I'm referring to, this is hands-on learning. Hands-on learning is the most important type you can have. I can teach this all day long, but till you put your hands on the keyboard inside the admin center, really it doesn't kind of all come together. And you need to click through and see that flow. And this is especially one of those when those policies come along and start to impact the user experience. You want to see what that looks like. And then the last part is guest access. Guest access is fundamental to the idea of cross-organizational collaboration. It's frankly what everyone needs to do, especially in the world of contract and gig workers. We need to think about how can we securely offer access to assets. This is a huge thing, both in the government work I do, but also in the advertising agency work, in healthcare, in a lot of different places. More than one organization needs to collaborate to deliver a result. And not always will people have an Office 365 license that they're coming with. In creative, especially, sometimes we'll see people who have just, your any other type of credential, but you as the host need to give them access to those documents. And so having the right policies around guest access and aligning that to your sensitivity labels is the best practice. And again, that is achieved inside of Azure Active Directory and the service admin centers. But first, you have to think it through. Maybe in your business you don't have that many guests outside, but then to do work. But you might want to think about collaborating with customers. Because we're in a new era now, and people have an expectation around, at least in the US, of curbside delivery, of online ordering, of online customer service. And if you can have your service personnel have an instance of Teams on their mobile device where they can take a picture of some damage to a product, for instance, and then share that back, and you can share it with a customer. These are ways that the technology actually can impact your business. To do that, you need to have good governance so that you feel safe doing that, and you know that the rest of your data is safe. So, you hear people talk about these solutions and they're wonderful, and I build them and love them, but I build them on that framework and that foundation of, the policies that I already know as an IT pro I have put in place. So if you are struggling with getting traction in your organization for governance or champion work or adoption work or more help training, start talking about the solutions you can implement once these things are done, right? It's business opportunities that will allow us to have the resources we need to get this work done, and the attention of our business leaders. And so if there's the secret sauce to my success in doing these projects around the world, it's that. Right? I will show people a beautiful world of one of those solutions, and I will say, first, we're going to do our homework, we're going to do our governance, and then you can have the bright, shiny object. All right, it's 9:56. I want to pause for a moment and see if there's more questions. I will absolutely share this deck with all of you, and I want to just remind you of the cheat sheet here. I'll put that on this screen, but I'll share this with you, Mike, so you can share it with others.
Awesome. Yeah, and that was I think the last question we had. We haven't had any more. I got something great session. That's it. That's it. Okay. But that's it for questions. I did want to say one thing when you were talking about setting up that test area, just to reiterate, I find that my customers who are doing the best job with Teams adoption, with really having a handle on that, and not just Teams adoption, but those other pieces that feed in like SharePoint and et cetera, where they roll out all those templates in there and play around with them to get a semblance of it, and they've incorporated things back. But that is crucial, I think, at least in my opinion.
Oh, I 100% agree. Testing in production is fine for some things, not for this kind of stuff. And also training in production, right? I really look at this, my test site that I maintain, that I just pay for, is for my own education and training. Yes, of course, Microsoft offers these things to me, but I like to maintain my own, frankly, because it's portable. It's mine. It has nothing to do with my work credentials. And I really, really know that I won't mess anything up at my actual job as I'm teaching myself the new things that come out every day. So there are also going to be more workshops and content on this specific topic on Microsoft Learn. And to follow along with that, it'll be useful for you to have your own credential there, or to decide where you want all of your badges from taking that training to accrue. So looking forward to bringing more stuff to this audience. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's been a great session. I just want to reiterate to everybody that, and I'm pulling up screen too, there we go, that if you're not aware, at the conclusion of today's presentation, let me get that full screen, there we go. At the conclusion of today's, I'll actually be taking this recording. We'll post it out to aka.ms/HLS blog. All the links that Karuana has been sharing, that we've been posting as we go, we'll have those there. The slides, this is where you'll be able to find everything, as well as links to the audio podcast version. So Karuana, thank you. It's been great.
Thank you, sir. Well, you have a great time, and I'll make sure to bring you back all those resources when we publish them and update them and all that good noise.
Awesome. That'd be great. And Pete, I know he was sick, so thank you for being a trooper and joining us today. Despite all that, and for everybody that joined, thanks for joining us. Have a great day, and as always, take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.